let's take a look at the human resourcing strategy which is being commonly followed. So specific human resourcing strategies can be mentioned as like managerial staff, technical and professional staff. These are the people who fly from one particular point to another point to just transfer their skills and to execute jobs. Now what are the strategies? The first and foremost is the key positions are filled with parent country nationals. Let's say for example a US firm having operations in India sends its US nationals to man the operations they headed, because it is a belief that the consistent cultural practices and management practices can be replicated when you have the right people back home and they are transferred to a particular unit, so you have the same kind of practices. Now is it really advantageous? Let's see. Proponents of this particular strategy say that it facilitates transfer of culture and practices of foreign company. You are simply going to replicate, so it's an advantage, you have consistency. Is it really so? Critics say that people from abroad, say for example a US national has difficulty in adjusting himself to the work culture in India, so it takes time and it is difficult for him to adjust to the local culture, how decisions are made, how the information is processed, and the time taken is simply different from what you have back in the US. This is the first strategy. Now second is the key positions are filled by local nationals. Let's take the example of the same US firm. It employs Indian nationals to man the operations in India. Now this avoids the difficulties for the expatriate in adjustments and all those related negative aspects, because your Indian nationals are manning the operations and you have a touch and feel of the culture and it is consistent with the local environment. But when it comes to cooperations with the local team, you have cultural and linguistic barriers and it takes time before you can actually transfer the practices and culture back home to the local country. Now key position filled with best available people, there's a third and the best strategy, wherein the best talent is employed in the best place regardless of their nationality or their heritage or any other aspect which might put the operations in jeopardy. So the best people are in the best slot. Say for example a US firm employing an Indian in Germany. So this is a best fit wherein talent goes into the right slot. But what is the advantage? Now it develops genuine cross-cultural experience. You have a blend of all the world experience and the best practices can be replicated in the workplace. What is the downside of it? It requires strong corporate culture, communication and coordination. Only mature organizations with sufficient international HRM practice and strategy can boldly take such steps to go for international talent and put them in a particular place. So it has to be a highly developed and mature organization. It needs more effort. Now offshoring is a major trend in globalization. Organizations in developed countries outsource functions which they feel is cost effective and they can concentrate more on their core areas. Now to another group company or third party overseas. Offshoring can happen to their own subsidiary company in a foreign location, or it can be a third party. So what is the advantage? You have access to a large, low cost, which does not mean low quality, low cost and well educated labor forces in the developing economies, say in India, in Philippines, in Indonesia. So you have a large pool of highly skilled people available for you to carry on your operations at a relatively low cost, so that you can compete in an efficient way in the international market. Now what are the typical industries where offshoring is done? Manufacturing, where your components are sourced from all across the world, so you have units and your capabilities are multiplied because of the advantage involved in low cost destinations. Manufacturing, financial services and service sectors, your call centers and your back office operations and research, these are the areas wherein typically offshoring is being carried out. Now what is that which HR needs to do in human resource development in international HRM context? Now you need people who are cognitively complex, which means you need people who can have multiple solutions, not just one solution which fits all. People who can think on their feet and are aware of the cultural differences, so you need cognitively complex people. Now self-monitoring managers with capabilities of self-monitoring, where they are sensitive to the verbal and non-verbal cues and adapt their strategies and behavior according to the emerging the demands of the workplace environment. A global perspective, simply put, he needs to understand what are the perspectives involved in a particular issue, especially when it involves different culture, and he needs to understand what is the global community and economy and interrelationships. He needs to understand the various aspects to it so that to avoid any potential disputes involved, and boundary spanning capabilities wherein your thinking is no longer restricted to your own particular country or geography. It needs boundary spanning capabilities, and they have to be interpreters of their own and other cultures so as to minimize any friction and for a smooth working culture. Let's take a look at convergence and divergence in HRM. Now, organizations are trying to achieve harmonization of HR practices across different companies, their own sister companies, or when they are offshoring to third parties, to achieve consistent HRM practices so as to avoid friction. So, greater consistency and fairness across national borders. Some of the standard recruitment practices or your compensation and benefit packages and your talent management practices can be replicated across the borders. Now, this facilitates free movement of labor. Now, exchange and sharing of certain technical terms and theories. Let's say, for example, the Swedish style of autonomous working groups, wherein the Swedish are famous for their highly self-managed and motivated teams. For say, for example, their watch industry, which is state of the art and it has a long heritage. So these are self-managed teams. These are being replicated across countries to achieve a particular level of competitiveness. Or so Japanese style quality circles. Japan has been known for their quality circles and their obsession for high quality products and work practices. So these are being constantly being replicated across industries and across countries. So harmonization happens in terms of HRM to replicate these kind of practices so as to achieve a level of quality and compete in the world market. Now, what are the factors in divergence? You cannot have the same practices in all aspects of HRM when it comes to managing a diverse workforce. So what makes the difference? Cultural differences, let's say, what impacts the history, the traditions, the language, and the social development and the religious beliefs definitely have a say when you are having a diverse workforce. Now, national legal frameworks, obviously the legislations in those particular countries will advise you on certain aspects and you are bound to adhere to those aspects. So this definitely has a say. Now, the structural factors, the education and training systems, the labor pool, these definitely have an impact on the divergence aspects of HRM. Now, employee relations, the tradition and ideologies, how have been the trade unions in the past, how were they formed, what is the impact of the labor unions in the workforce and in taking decisions, and what has been the history, what is their ideology. So this definitely has a say. In national economic development, what is the unemployment level, what are the rates of inflation and economic growth. These definitely have an impact on the strategies you are going to roll out in handling your HRM practices. So this obviously leads to divergence in HRM. Now let's take a look at comparative HRM. It is a systematic method of investigation relating to two or more countries which seeks to explain the patterns and variations encountered in cross-national HRM. It is, simply put, a study of cultures in two countries which affects your HRM practices. Now, how do you manage diversity? When culture is different, you have to put in efforts and measures to study cultures and understand how it affects your business practices. Now, culture can be defined as a set of basic assumptions. How do people react in a particular situation, and what are the manifestations of culture, and what leads from your culture? How do people receive and how do they react, and what are the factors involved in culture, what are the behaviors, the rituals and underlying values and beliefs. Now, for an organization to be successful, managing diversity is a key factor, just as your other strategies in business. So this definitely calls for a thorough understanding of the cultural practices and to lay down strategies to move forward.